one of the hardest lessons people learn in life is this. The moment you help someone out of darkness, there's a chance they will eventually resent you for seeing them there. Most people think betrayal comes from hatred. It doesn't. Betrayal very often comes from psychological discomfort, and the uncomfortable truth is that helping someone can accidentally create that discomfort inside them. Human beings are not driven only by logic, they are driven by identity. Every person walks around protecting a mental image of who they believe they are: competent, independent, strong, in control. But the moment someone has to rely on another person for emotional support, money, opportunity, protection, guidance, or stability, that self-image takes a hit. Even if they never say it out loud, part of them feels exposed. This is why some people can receive genuine kindness and still become hostile toward the person who gave it, because your help forced them into a psychological position they didn't want to occupy. Dependency. And dependency creates vulnerability. Vulnerability creates shame in emotionally immature people. Now, emotionally healthy individuals process this differently. A secure person can receive help and feel gratitude because they don't interpret temporary weakness as personal humiliation. But insecure people, especially those with anxious, avoidant, or disorganized attachment patterns, experience help in a completely different way. To them, receiving support feels like losing status. It feels like surrender. And instead of confronting the discomfort within themselves, they unconsciously redirect that discomfort toward the helper. That's where the resentment begins. You'll notice this pattern throughout human behavior. Someone gives another person a job, mentorship, emotional support, a place to stay, guidance during hard times, and eventually the person they helped becomes cold, defensive, dismissive, even disloyal. From the outside, it looks irrational, but psychologically, it makes perfect sense. Because every interaction with you reminds them of a chapter of their life where they lacked power. And most people do not want reminders of weakness. They want distance from it. This is why betrayal often increases after the person becomes stronger. Once they regain stability, confidence, or independence, they feel an unconscious need to separate themselves from the identity they had when they needed you. Sometimes they do this subtly, sometimes aggressively, but the motivation underneath is the same. If I can reject the person who helped me, maybe I can erase the feeling of weakness associated with needing them. That's not wisdom. That's ego protection. And this is where a lot of good-hearted people become confused. They assume loyalty is automatically created through sacrifice. It's not. Sacrifice reveals character, it does not create character. If someone lacks self-awareness, gratitude, or emotional maturity before you help them, your generosity will not magically install those traits into them. In fact, intense generosity can sometimes amplify their insecurity because now they feel internally indebted to someone they secretly envy. That's another uncomfortable reality people avoid talking about. Help creates comparison. The person who rescued them becomes evidence of capability, discipline, stability, or strength they may not see in themselves. And insecure people often respond to comparison with resentment instead of inspiration. So the betrayal was never truly about your kindness being wrong. It was about their inability to emotionally reconcile what your kindness revealed about them. Once you understand this, you stop taking certain betrayals personally. You begin seeing human behavior with more precision. Not cynicism, precision. You realize that some people are grateful for help, while others experience help as an assault on their pride. And if you don't understand the difference, you will spend years confused by human nature. Because the painful truth is this: some people would rather destroy the bridge that carried them than admit they once needed help crossing the river. And the moment you understand that, you stop confusing generosity with immunity from betrayal. What makes this even more fascinating is that people rarely betray you because of what you did to them. More often, they betray you because of what your presence forces them to see inside themselves. That's the part most people never understand. Human beings do not simply react to reality, they react to reflection. And sometimes your existence becomes a mirror someone cannot tolerate looking into. When you help someone grow, support them emotionally, guide them through hardship, or pull them toward a better version of life, you intentionally create contrast. Your discipline exposes their lack of discipline. Your emotional control exposes their chaos. Your loyalty exposes their inconsistency. Your ambition exposes their complacency. And while emotionally mature people use that contrast as motivation, insecure people experience it as pressure. That pressure builds quietly. At first, they admire you. They appreciate your insight, your stability, your strength, but admiration can quickly become resentment when a person benefits from your example without developing the courage to evolve themselves. Because every time they stand next to you, they are reminded of the gap between who they are and who they could become. And most people do not want transformation as much as they claim they do. They want the comfort of imagining transformation without enduring the discomfort required to achieve it. That's why some people sabotage the very relationships that elevated them. Not because you harmed them, but because your presence keeps confronting them with unfinished parts of themselves. You become a living reminder of effort they avoid, discipline they lack, or potential they abandoned. Eventually, the mind starts searching for relief from that internal tension. And one of the fastest ways to escape uncomfortable self-awareness is to devalue the person triggering it. Psychologically, this is a defense mechanism. If they can convince themselves that you are controlling, arrogant, manipulative, lucky, or overrated, then they no longer have to confront their own stagnation. This is why betrayal often comes with criticism that feels strangely disconnected from reality. The criticism is not truly about emotional camouflage protecting their ego. You see this constantly in human relationships. A mentor gets betrayed by the student. A loyal partner gets discarded once the insecure person gains confidence. A generous friend becomes the target of gossip from the very people they supported. Why? Because growth without emotional maturity often creates entitlement instead of gratitude. And there's another layer underneath this that most people miss. When you consistently help someone, you also become psychologically tied to the version of them that struggled. You remember who they were before the confidence, before the money, before the status, before the reinvention. For secure individual, this creates loyalty and appreciation. But for insecure individuals, it creates discomfort because they desperately want separation from their old identity. So instead of honoring the people who saw them at their weakest, they distance themselves from them. Sometimes they do it subtly through coldness and avoidance, other times through outright betrayal, but the motive is often the same. They are trying to kill the emotional memory of who they used to be, and this becomes especially dangerous with avoidant personalities and narcissistic tendencies. These individuals struggle deeply with gratitude because gratitude requires humility. To genuinely appreciate another person's impact on your life, you must admit that you needed them. And for some personalities, that admission feels psychologically intolerable, so they rewrite the story. Suddenly your support wasn't that important. Your sacrifices become minimized. Your loyalty becomes invisible. They create narratives where they succeeded entirely alone because the ego craves independence even when reality says otherwise. This is why emotionally intelligent people stop expecting fairness from wounded egos. They understand that insecurity changes memory, perception, and loyalty itself. They realize that some people would rather protect their pride than protect the relationships that built them. And once you truly understand this, you stop being shocked when certain people turn against those who helped them most, because you realize the betrayal was never really about hatred, it was about reflection. Your presence forced them to confront a version of themselves they were trying to escape, and weak people will often attack the mirror long before they ever fix what it reflects. Now this leads into something even deeper. And this is where many compassionate people unknowingly create the conditions for their own betrayal. Because helping someone is not automatically dangerous, but helping without boundaries often is. A lot of people confuse generosity with endless access. They believe that being a good person means constantly rescuing, constantly sacrificing, constantly giving more than they should. But psychologically, overgiving changes the structure of a relationship. It creates imbalance. And human beings are extremely sensitive to imbalance, especially when status, dependence, and emotional power become me involved. The moment one person consistently becomes the rescuer and the other becomes the receiver, an invisible hierarchy forms. One person is associated with capability, stability, and solutions. The other becomes associated with need, struggle, and dependence. Even if nobody says it out loud, both nervous systems feel it. At first, the dynamic may feel positive. The helper feels needed. The receiver feels supported. But over time, something dangerous begins happening beneath the surface. The person receiving constant help starts battling an internal conflict between gratitude and humiliation. This is because dependence creates psychological debt, and debt is emotionally heavy for insecure people. Emotionally mature individuals understand reciprocity. They appreciate support and eventually seek ways to restore balance through growth, loyalty, contribution, or gratitude. But emotionally immature individuals often experience debt as pressure. The longer the imbalance continues, the more trapped they begin to feel, and eventually, the mind starts searching for a way to escape the discomfort. This is where betrayal often enters the picture, because if someone feels unconscious, seemingly inferior within a relationship, they will eventually attempt to rebalance the dynamic. Healthy people rebalance through self-improvement. Unhealthy people rebalance through disrespect, rebellion, manipulation, or sabotage. Think about how often people suddenly become hostile after being helped repeatedly. They become dismissive, argumentative, arrogant, or distant. On the surface, it looks ungrateful, but underneath, it's often a psychological attempt to reclaim power. They are trying to prove mostly to themselves that they are no longer beneath you. And this becomes even more intense when the helper has weak boundaries. When you constantly save people from consequences, tolerate disrespect, overextend your energy, or make yourself endlessly available, something subtle happens in the other person's mind. Your value decreases, not because kindness lacks value, but because human psychology naturally discounts what appears unlimited. People respect what has standards. This is why emotionally intelligent people understand a principle most others miss. Compassion without boundaries eventually becomes self-destruction. Because when generosity is detached from discernment, it teaches people that access to you requires no accountability, and once accountability disappears, resentment quietly grows. The irony is that overhelpers often believe they are creating loyalty by sacrificing more. In reality, they may be creating dependency without respect, and dependency without respect is one of the most unstable emotional combinations in human behavior. This is especially common in anxious attachment dynamics. People with anxious tendencies often overgive because they unconsciously believe love must be earned through usefulness. So they become rescuers, problem solvers, emotional caretakers. They tolerate imbalance because they fear abandonment. But ironically, the absence of boundaries often accelerates the exact betrayal they were trying to prevent. Why? Because people do not feel secure around someone who has no standards for self-protection. On a subconscious level, they sense weakness in the inability to say no. And human beings rarely protect what they subconsciously perceive as weak. That's a painful truth, but it's a real one. Strong people help others without collapsing their own identity in the process. They can support someone without becoming. They're responsible for someone. They can give without needing validation in return. And most importantly, they understand that true generosity requires emotional discipline, because once helping becomes compulsive, it stops being kindness and starts becoming control, fear, or self-worth management disguised as virtue. And this changes everything. The goal is not to become cold or selfish. The goal is to stop creating relationships built on imbalance. Help people, absolutely. Support people when it matters. But never build your value around being indispensable to broken individuals. Because the more someone feels psychologically trapped beneath your help, the more likely they are to rebel against it one day. And the strongest form of generosity is not rescuing people endlessly, it's helping them without surrendering your boundaries, your standards, or your self-respect. What's important to understand at this stage is that betrayal is not always an act of hatred. Very often, it is an act of psychological separation. And once you understand that, you stop viewing betrayal purely as a moral failure and start recognizing it as a test of emotional authority. Because many people are not emotional, only self-sustaining. They regulate their emotions through proximity to stronger individuals. They borrow certainty from confident people. They borrow stability from disciplined people. They borrow identity from whoever gives them direction, validation, or emotional safety. And while this arrangement may appear functional on the surface, it creates an unstable dependency underneath. At first, they admire your calmness, your intelligence, your emotional control. Your presence organizes their chaos. You become the person they call during uncertainty, the person they lean on during emotional storms, the person whose approval stabilizes their sense of self. But over time, something begins happening internally. The more they rely on your emotional structure, the more they begin fearing it. Because dependency always creates tension in insecure minds. This is especially true for people with anxious or disorganized attachment patterns. These individuals crave closeness, but closeness also terrifies them. They want connection, yet emotional intimacy makes them feel exposed and vulnerable. So they exist in a constant psychological contradiction. They seek security while simultaneously are existing the very thing providing it. That contradiction eventually needs release, and betrayal often becomes the release valve. You'll notice this pattern repeatedly in human relationships. Someone spends years needing your guidance, support, reassurance, or emotional steadiness. Then suddenly, once they gain a little confidence or independence, they challenge you, disrespect you, distance themselves, or turn against you completely. Most people interpret this as pure disloyalty, but psychologically, what's often happening is an attempt to reclaim emotional autonomy. They are trying to prove to themselves that they no longer need you. Now here's the dangerous part. Insecure people often confuse independence with opposition. Instead of developing their own strength peacefully, they feel compelled to defeat, reject, or dethrone the person they once depended on. Because as long as they still admire you, part of them still feels psychologically beneath you. So the ego creates a solution: diminish the source of dependency. This is why betrayal frequently comes after periods of closeness, loyalty, or admiration. The relationship becomes emotionally intolerable for someone who lacks internal stability. Your strength starts feeling less like safety and more like a threat to their autonomy. And the more emotionally grounded you are, the more intense this reaction can become. Calm people unintentionally expose emotional chaos in others. Disciplined people expose impulsiveness. Secure people expose insecurity. So eventually, some individuals stop experiencing your presence as comfort and start experiencing it as pressure. Not because you changed, but because their unresolved internal conflict intensified. This is why emotionally intelligent people stop chasing explanations after betrayal. They understand that many betrayals are not logical decisions made from clarity. They are emotional reactions made from unresolved identity struggles. A person who lacks a stable sense of self will eventually rebel against anyone who becomes too psychologically important to them. That's the deeper lesson here. And if you don't understand this, betrayal will always feel personal. You'll spend years asking, after everything I did for them, how could they do this? But the answer is usually hidden inside the emotional dynamic itself. The more someone relied on you emotionally, without developing themselves internally, the more unstable the relationship was becoming beneath the surface. Because emotional dependency without self-awareness eventually transforms admiration into resentment. This doesn't mean you should stop helping people. It means you should stop building relationships where your emotional strength becomes someone else's entire identity support system. Healthy relationships are built on mutual regulation, mutual growth, and mutual responsibility, not emotional hierarchy. And this is where true emotional authority reveals itself. Emotionally powerful people do not collapse after betrayal because they never tied their identity to being needed. They understand human behavior deeply enough to recognize that some people enter your life to grow beside you, while others only attach themselves long enough to borrow stability. The moment they feel strong enough to stand alone, they mistake separation for power and betrayal for freedom. But real strength does not require destroying the hands that once held you up. And this brings us to the final realization, the lesson that separates emotionally exhausted people from emotionally intelligent people. At some point, you have to stop expecting human nature to operate according to your personal standards of loyalty. Because one of the greatest sources of suffering is the assumption that your heart automatically exists inside other people. It doesn't. Some people help because they value connection. Others help because they seek control. Some stay loyal through struggle. Others stay loyal only while the relationship benefits their identity, comfort, or survival. And once you truly understand this, you stop romanticizing loyalty and start observing behavior with clarity. The mistake most people make after betrayal is becoming cynical. They decide never to help anyone again, never trust again, never open themselves emotionally again. But that response is just wounded idealism transforming into emotional armor. It's still reactive. It still means other people control your internal state. Emotionally powerful people move differently. They help others because helping aligns with their values, not because they expect permanent devotion in return. That distinction changes everything. When your generosity is rooted in identity instead of expectation, betrayal stops having the power to sigh, or chemically destroy you. Because you were acting from principle, not transaction. Now, that does not mean becoming naive. In fact, true emotional intelligence requires becoming far more selective about who receives your energy, access, and loyalty. You stop confusing potential with character. You stop assuming suffering automatically creates depth. And you stop giving people unlimited chances simply because you understand their pain. Understanding someone's wounds does not obligate you to tolerate their behavior. That's an important distinction. Many people with anxious attachment patterns or rescuer tendencies unconsciously believe that being needed gives them value. So they overinvest in broken people, hoping loyalty will eventually emerge from sacrifice. But human psychology doesn't work that way. The more you ignore patterns, excuse disrespect, or abandon your own standards to maintain connection, the more you train others to believe your boundaries are negotiable. And people rarely respect what continually tolerates disrespect. This is why emotionally grounded individuals pay close attention to patterns early. Not promises, not words, patterns. Because character always leaks tea, through behavior. Gratitude leaks through behavior. Entitlement leaks through behavior. Integrity leaks through behavior. You do not need years to recognize dangerous patterns in people. You only need emotional honesty. Watch how people respond to correction. Watch how they speak about those who helped them previously. Watch how they handle responsibility, envy, accountability, and discomfort. These small moments reveal future betrayal long before the betrayal itself arrives. And once you develop this level of awareness, something interesting happens. You stop trying to save everyone, not from cruelty, from wisdom. Because mature people understand a difficult truth: some individuals are committed to cycles you cannot rescue them from. They will repeat self-destruction, resentment, manipulation, or disloyalty, no matter how much support they receive, because the real issue is not external struggle. It is internal unwillingness to confront themselves. And no amount of love can compensate for someone's refusal to develop self-awareness. This is where boundaries stop feeling selfish and start feeling sacred. A boundary is not punishment. It is psychological self-respect. It is the recognize that your peace, energy, and emotional stability are valuable resources. And once you understand human behavior deeply enough, you realize that protecting those resources is not hardness, it's intelligence. The strongest people are not the ones who close their hearts after betrayal. They are the ones who keep their hearts open while sharpening their discernment. They continue helping others, but they stop handing out trust blindly. They stop mistaking emotional intensity for loyalty. They stop trying to earn permanence from temporary people. Because real power is not becoming cold after betrayal. Real power is remaining compassionate without becoming exploitable. And when you finally reach that level, betrayal no longer turns you bitter. It turns you observant. You stop asking, "Why did they betray me?" and start asking, "What did their behavior reveal long before the betrayal happened?" That question changes your life. Because wisdom is not learning how to avoid all betrayal. Wisdom is learning how to see people clearly before you hand them access to your peace.